Max Scherzer, Clayton Kershaw, Justin Verlander, Miguel Cabrera, Albert Pujols among the current players who we would all consider locks for Cooperstown. Will Leatch of MLB.com has identified some more than just the obvious, and as we say good morning to Will, he's written on MLB.com on the behalf of every team, and who is the most likely Hall of Famer on that current roster. And there's no automatic answers for most of these teams. We know about Pujols and Verlander and guys like that, Will, but let's talk about some of the teams for whom there aren't easy answers. And let's start with the AL champion Tampa Bay Rays. If there's one guy who's going to the Hall of Fame from that current roster, who is it?
Yeah, it's hard, right? Because you think of a World Series teams and you think, oh, they must be, they at least have a couple Hall of Fame guys. They really kind of don't. I thought about Blake Snell, maybe because he's won a Cy Young, but there's been a lot of years where he didn't pitch a lot. I actually felt like I had to go with Wander Franco, actually. There's a few teams like this. The Orioles are like this with an Adley Rutschman, for example, where you're just trying, like, there's really not anyone, so you're hoping on potential. But me, Wander Franco was probably the closest you get just because the potential's so high, but you never want to be like, okay, Wander Franco, this guy here writing this story says you're going to make the Hall of Fame. Good luck. Good luck with that. I'm sure that will work out very well.
I get where you're going here. I get where you're going because, you know, for a lot of the guys on that roster, they're already halfway through their major league career, and you kind of throw a dart on a guy that apparently is the greatest prospect we've seen in the last X number of years. So why not?
I mean, the interesting thing for me, Will, there's almost like a dividing line or a cutoff line because the game has changed so much in the last 5 years. They're not pitching deep in games. They're not getting a chance to play every day. They're getting platoon. So the game in itself has kind of limited who might be a Hall of Famer moving forward. You agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. I think, frankly, voters have still not quite adjusted to the change that has happened with starting pitching. Like, there's just a lot of guys. Like, there's a time in the past where if a guy was 28, one of the top pitchers in baseball, and they'd already won a Cy Young, you'd think, wow, all right, he's going to have a good another 10 years and 25, 30 starts a year or 35 starts a year. That's just not the way it is anymore. And I think that it's hard to make that adjustment. We'll see with some of the other people on the list. It's hard to nail down. Obviously, a Verlander is clearly a Hall of Famer. But with a lot of starting pitchers, you wonder how much they're even going to be considered starting pitchers for that much longer. It's really, really difficult to figure out what makes a starting pitcher a Hall of Famer anymore.
So what do you think about the big contract guys? Because I look at, like, Harper's going to be in the Hall of Fame. Mookie Betts will be in. Manny Machado, because they're going to play. The contract is going to allow them to play and put numbers up. What do you think about the big contract guys?
Yeah, that certainly lets them assure that they're going to get all that playing time. I think Harper's a great example where, like, you know, I mean, for example, Trout retires tomorrow. Trout's in the Hall of Fame. Harper's not there yet, but I mean, clearly until 2000, I think it's 76, he's going to be playing 155 games a year. He's going to have plenty of opportunity to compile numbers. So that does make a difference. I think Machado is actually particularly interesting in that. You know, he actually it's almost kind of a bummer for him that his probably best offensive and defensive season happened when there were only 60 games, because I think that clearly he has kind of turned a corner and he's going to have a lot of opportunity to play games. It does give you that advantage of, like, guaranteed playing time. I mean, you can look at someone in the past on that, look at someone like Pujols. You can argue that he was probably in after he already left St. Louis, but certainly being able to add to those numbers over the last 4 or 5 years, if just because he's being paid so much money, they're not going to bench him, I think has really has helped him get into that inner tier in a way that has added to the back half of his career. Now, an interesting person like that is someone else that's on the list, which is Buster Posey. Actually, you know, I picked him as the Giants guy. It's interesting because, like, now there's kind of this consensus, and there's some stat head arguments about it, that Yadier Molina, for example, is a Hall of Famer, or at least almost certainly a Hall of Famer. I don't know if that consensus is there for Buster Posey, which is interesting because about 4 or 5 years ago, the idea was Buster Posey was the better catcher and Yadier Molina was maybe 1A to him. Now I think with Posey missing last year with some of the injuries he's had, going to first base, it's interesting that he's lost a little momentum in that regard. But, you know, he, unlike Molina, has an MVP. He has 3 World Series titles. I think Posey is probably the best bet on that team, but he's someone that's going to be really interesting to watch in the next couple of years.
For the purposes of this piece, you broke everything down by division, and in the NL West, there are 2 players that you suggest would be Cooperstown worthy. Neither one of them is no longer a Giant, but both of them there for their exploits as a Giant. Posey and his longtime battery mate, now a Diamondback, Madison Bumgarner. In my mind, a Hall of Famer as well. He's your Diamondbacks entry?
Yeah, but, you know, I think he's close, but like last year was rough. Like last year was a very difficult year. And certainly I know a lot of Diamondback fans are concerned. You know, remember when he was signed, the idea was, oh, the Diamondbacks are almost there and he's going to be the one that pushes them over the top. Now it looks like they're kind of pivoting in a different direction. And now you wonder, is he going to be okay? The fastball velocity was way off last year. Again, you know, you look at his postseason exploits and his regular season numbers are very good too. You would think that he'd be in a good spot, but if he pitches like he did last year for a couple more years, those career numbers are going to be hard to justify, really kind of regardless of the postseason numbers. So while he may be an issue for the Diamondbacks, at least financially, I think to get on, I think he's still okay, but I think he probably needs a year or two more to get those numbers back to where they were before, so you can add in the postseason stuff to make it happen. But certainly there's no one else on the Diamondbacks that's particularly close right now. So he was an easy call there.
Safe bet.
So real quick, we're getting ready to wrap your segment up here. Do you think guys in that case can play themselves out of the Hall of Fame?
I think so. I think you've seen this. I think Posey is potentially an example in that regard. I think that you've seen guys who you would have thought at age 9 or 10 in their career were obvious people, and then it just falls off. You know, clearly, you know, I think with the way the numbers are going, you're still going to look at averages more, and maybe some of the big compiling numbers won't matter as much. But certainly, you know, you see, I mean, listen, Albert Pujols is almost not a 300 hitter anymore. That's absurd. That's crazy to think of Albert Pujols now as a 300 hitter. So I think players can potentially play themselves out.
Good stuff, Will. Thank you.
Will Leatch identifying one future Hall of Famer on each team, and it's on MLB.com. Read all about it, as they say. Will, we appreciate the visit again today.